Hi, good afternoon, and thank you very much, Alessandra and Alessia, for organising this conference. I'm going to speak from a paper. I wish I could extemporise, but I think I need some experience. I'm going to talk predominantly about my own practice, but within the context of some kind of research by a number of other writers and thinkers, and it's predominantly to do with the quarries and architecture within the landscape of Palestine and Israel. Okay. So 4 years ago, I set out in search of some photographs Frank Kafka had commissioned as evidence into the conditions of quarries in former Czechoslovakia in 1911. The photographs were rumoured to be in private collections in Jerusalem. Although I did not find the photographs, what I did discover was that the quarries in the occupied Palestinian territories of the West Bank have played a significant part in the formation of the State of Israel. They are also a livelihood for many Palestinians with devastating consequences for the West Bank and its people. My work investigates how the stone from the quarries can be perceived as an archive in which the historical, social and political forces that have impacted on the West Bank are embedded, and how Israel has created a false archive of the future through the expropriation of the stone. My film White Oil 2014 attempts to create a counter-narrative to the dominant Israeli narrative by engaging with people, time and space, and proposes that the stone from the quarries acts as an archive for the conditions of labour and a biography of the collective Palestinian worker. So before I show, towards the end of this paper, I'm going to show, throughout the paper I'll show images from the film, and then I'm going to show you a couple of clips, but I'm first going to kind of set up the kind of context in which the stone is used within Israel. There are over 350 quarries in the West Bank, and the stone excavated has been termed the white oil of Palestine, the only raw material available to support the Palestinian economy. The stone represents approximately 4.5% of the GDP and provides a livelihood for over 20,000 workers. However, of the stone and sand excavated from the quarries, 65% is expropriated by Israel for their construction industry and to build the illegal settlements in the West Bank. Israel also exports the stone internationally, claiming it as their own product. Today, almost every hillside is scarred by the brutal incision of the quarries. Walking through the landscape of the West Bank, this mutilation becomes disconcertingly visible to the naked eye. The land pillaged and defaced, its wound left open, a geology of disaster at the very least. To give you a sense of scale, the West Bank covers an area a quarter the size of Wales, with Palestinians making up approximately 83% of the population and Israeli settlers 17%. The West Bank is divided into three areas, A, B and C. And under Area B is under Israeli administration, and Area C, the yellow and grey areas on the map, is 70% of the total region and is controlled by Israel's security and administration and affects the extent to which Palestinians are able to use space. The quarries are situated around Hebron in the south of the West Bank, Nablus and Jenin in the north, as well as Ramallah in the periphery of Jerusalem. Many of the quarries fall within Area C and are poorly regulated. Often they are located in close proximity to residential areas where a high concentration of dust and particles can be found. In recent years, there's been an increased level of asthma in the environs of the mining, particularly amongst children. The quarries are also destroying the carefully balanced ecology and biodiversity of the West Bank, as well as damaging the local agricultural land that there is. There are also over 800 stone-cutting factories in the region, many intensively located in Bethlehem and Hebron. The dust and conditions of work in the factories causes something called stone lung, meaning an entire working life of employees in these factories is usually no more than 8 years. Because Israel controls 70% of the territory, the Palestinian Authority struggles to enforce environmental and labour laws in the majority of the West Bank. There are also now a growing number of quarries owned by Israeli entrepreneurs, as Israel has very few quarries within its so-called borders, due to strict laws governing the noise and dust levels produced by quarries inside Israel. They therefore rely heavily on the material excavated from the quarries. Under the Fourth Geneva Convention, Hague Regulation 55, as an occupying power, Israel is prohibited by international law from expropriating and utilising the West Bank's national resources, unless it is for the sole benefit of the occupied population, the Palestinian people. Israel is also liable to pay the occupied territory a lease if it profits from its land. This has been totally ignored. In order to understand how quarrying has become such an intrinsic part of Palestinian livelihood, we must unfold the narratives around Israel's appetite for the stone and the underlying ideologies at work. Collective memory has been an important objective in Israeli national state building. Archaeology, architecture, history and education have been main players in activating collective memory towards the retrieval of the past and the creation of the future. While archaeologists have sought Jewish history below the ground, architects have worked on the ground to define Israeliness as a local native culture that has been taken over by the Palestinian latecomer. In 1967, following the occupation of the West Bank and Jerusalem, Israel encouraged the excavation of the stone from the West Bank as a way of naturalising construction projects in Israel and the settlements. In doing so, they invested the stone with national, ideological and spiritual narratives as a way of symbolising their presence in the landscape. The stone also functions as a unifying material and a way of designing strategic military outposts in the West Bank. Throughout the 20th century, a number of bylaws, initially implemented by the British Mandate, were put in place to ensure that the main material of construction in Jerusalem was the saffron-coloured limestone. On a symbolic level, the stone was appropriated to catch a sense of spirituality and holiness, petrifying all construction in Jerusalem and its surrounding areas, from shopping malls to schools and community centres, synagogues and offices, and residential houses, with a sacred identity. In sales brochures, the yellow-hued limestone was portrayed as a precious stone carved from the holy mountains of Jerusalem. However, as A.L. Wiseman makes clear in his book, Hollow Land, when the city itself is perceived as holy and when its boundaries are flexibly redrawn to suit ever-changing political aims, holiness inevitably becomes a planning issue. The stone was also used as a central component in postmodern architecture in Israel and particularly Jerusalem, coinciding with the housing boom in post-1967. Architecture of this period was infatuated with place and region, where the idea of dwelling was pitched against housing and home in an increasingly alienated postmodern world. Ram Karma, chief architect of the Ministry of Construction and Housing in the 1970s, was responsible for overseeing the construction of residential areas in Israel. In his introduction to Israel Builds, an official publication by the Ministry of Housing, he states that we make every effort to build as much as our budget permits. Still, I feel that in all those efforts there is lack of one component, the component around which Israel came into existence, the establishment of a national home. For Karma, the search for national identity meant a sense of belonging to one's immediate surroundings and was to be conveyed and executed through architecture, in which the quarried limestone from the West Bank played a central role. However, the stone not only embodied the earthy nature of place, but also became a unifying material in strategically defining and extending Israel's borders beyond the Green Line. In 1967, a new urban master plan for the city of Jerusalem was put in place to ensure the city's unification. The architects of this plan stated that they must build the city in a manner that would prevent the possibility of it being repartitioned. In addition, they argued the material used in masonry construction must be measured according to its cultural value, with buildings seen as a conveyor of emotional messages. As a consequence, a unifying regulation was introduced, stating that new construction on the periphery of Jerusalem, construction that was fast moving into the remote hilltops of the West Bank, becoming the origins of the settlements that we see today, required stone cladding throughout the expanded municipal area. For the Jewish people, the stone facilitates an emotional identification with the landscape that cements their presence, ownership and authenticity. However, the ideal of daily life for Palestinians under occupation and the exhausting and dangerous physical labour provided by Palestinian quarry workers is not accounted for in the Israeli narrative. The stateless Palestinian, the dispossessed, the exile, and the exploited subject as cheap labour with no civil rights has been used for political calculation in the struggle for land and territory of which the stone and the quarries are part. The vast and multiple spaces of the quarries epitomise a region ravaged by ethnocide, colonialism, and globalisation. White Oil is a 65-minute single-screen film that engages with the quarries in the occupied Palestinian territories as multi-layered spaces where conflicts over land, excavation, ownership and identity and statehood take place. Employing a number of filmic languages, photography, documentary, the cinematic, fiction and testimony, with ethnographic methodologies playing an important role, the film addresses the quarries in the West Bank not just as industrial spaces, in which labour and excavation of raw materials take place, but also as lived spaces. In White Oil, the collective biography of workers and the biography of the stone and the quarries are weaved together into a single fabric to unfold narratives around colonialism, expropriation of land and mobility through the workers' day-to-day lives. The film looks in detail at the workings of particular quarries, how the quarries impact on the environment, and the lives of the surrounding communities, as well as how the quarries provide a livelihood for many Palestinians. Essential to the making of the film is a collaborative mode of address. The owners, workers and security guards engaged in the filmmaking process and the role of the artist, myself, as filmmaker, activist and ethnographer, all coming under scrutiny. The film is structured around the interplay between day and night, and the viewer is confined to images and sounds of the quarry. Visualization of the stone summation in the architecture and facades of Jerusalem and other areas of Israel is completely withheld, denying the viewer the pleasure of making comparisons between the two landscapes, and is only alluded to through the dialogue. The day scenes focus on the decimation of the landscape, the machines and non-human elements, settlements and landscapes, sounds of industry and stone cutting, with many of the images framed to demonstrate the tightening hold of the landscape and absence of sky. Small figures register the scale of the quarries, as well as the borders, transitions, and proximity of the quarries to residential areas. Ramsey, a security guard on the outskirts of Ramallah, who spends 5 nights a week sleeping in a porter cabin before going to his day job as a plumber for the municipality, appears intermittently throughout the film and provides a narrative consistency. As well as sharing his routines and observations, his story is about changing human values and how communities have been divided as a result of the occupation. He also speaks about his time in prison and about the transfer of power and a kind of administration from Israel to the PA in relation to the prison, system, which happens about sort of 2 to 3/3 of the way through the film. I'm going to show you a couple of clips from the film. The first clip conveys something of the spatial dynamics of the West Bank, and I closed off by the wall. And the second clip relates to the competitive loans that were offered to Palestinians after the 1967 war by the Israeli authorities, looking to expand the quarries.
يعني يوم الجمعة هون بكون فيش شغل وبنيجي بدري يعني بعد الصلاة باجي أنا بداوم وبتسوي برنامج وعرفنا وتخرفنا وقعدنا وصارت القصة.
زمان صار لك هون بالمحجر؟
إلي هون من يوم ما رجعت من برا 7 سنين. 7 سنين 7 سنين.
دليت على الكسارة
كان هون
قبل ترجع على المي.
كان هون لا كان هون يشتغل عمي. هنا كان في الكسارة يشتغل 20 حارس أيام شغلهم. كانت مفتوحة ما فيش جدار وكانت مفتوحة، وكان أنا كل حرامية وحشاشين القدس وكل هذا الموضوع يجوا هون. هذه الطريق طريق كالنديا القديمة اللي بقت اللي تطلع من عند المطار. يعني دوب الحصمة اللي بيطلعوها تكفيهم لمعمل البطن تبعهم. بجوز يفيض عندهم شوية، بس شوية يعني بيبيعوها لهون لداخل البلد. المشكلة مش في هذا، المشكلة في هذولاك الكسرات اللي بنت إسرائيل. يعني بيت نبالة ودير طريف كان فيها كسرات من زمان يعني. ولما صارت حرب 67 جمعوا كل أصحابين الكسرات، فاجتمعوا مع شو اسمه هذا رئيس الإدارة المدنية في السابق، فقال لهم بنعطيكم قروض ميسرة مشان تكبروا شغلكم على أساس أنهم يبنوا إسرائيل. فإحنا أهل بلدنا رفضوا يعني وسكروا كسراتهم وبطلوا يشتغلوا في الكسرات، بس أهل دير طريف اشتغلوا، لأنه دير طريف كانت مبنية يعني. دير طريف مدينة. بلدنا تعد لساتها مثل ما هي خراب، فيش فيها إشي، فيش فيها غير بيارات، والمنطقة الداخلية خراب.
Okay, I'm just gonna... In the second half of the film, the night scenes, by contrast, are more narrative-based and intimate, focusing on the social gathering of 4 brothers and their associates who own and work a small quarry near Ramallah. From a small town near Hebron, they spend 5 nights a week camping out in a metal shipping container, as the journey time from Ramallah to Hebron with the checkpoints and the separation wall takes twice as long, over 2.5 hours. The politics, reminiscences and anguishes articulated in the day-to-day narratives of the brothers as they sit around the fire, watching over their quarrying machines, reflect those of Ramsey. A generation younger, becomes clear that for the brothers, the hardships of earning a living and feeding their families has got the better of them. However, what is significant is the way the brothers and their associates share and interact with each other, and how the quarries at night are taken over by a sense of community. I'm actually going to get... After dusk, they gather around the campfire and share their lives over coffee and tea made with fresh sage. Around the camp, their meals were prepared in a Zarba stone oven. Halfway through the film, we learn that a particular stone from the brothers' quarry is widely sought after by Israelis and has properties that make it look much older once it has been exposed to the air.
شيء بدون سكر شوي. مرة
من مرة
على الأربعة
ولا
معهم سكري.
مش قضية سكري ما سكري بس بيشربوش بيبسط.
بتحبوا بشغل المحجرة؟
والله احنا بنحب نخلع ونبيع. هذا اهم شيء عندنا، ان البضاعة تكون نظيفة وتمشي في السوق.
شوف الحجر هذا يعني بالذات بير زيت يعني ببين انه اقدم حجر في كل المحاجر، يعني لا جمعين ولا نجاص عندنا ولا شيوخ ولا غيرها، اقدم حجر هو ده.
عشان هيك الإسرائيليين بيحبوا الحجر هذا؟
هذول في مهندسين يعني فحصوه، اجوا على دار مبنية يعني يجي تقول السنة انبنت اول عام كأنها إلها مبنية 50 سنة.
تعتيم لا قديم.
بعضيهم انه يعني قديم جدا لان بدهم يصيروا اصحاب
هم قدام
هم القدم بالضبط 100%. وانا واحد الناس بنيت صخره صفرة يعني بير زيت لان صخره نظيفه زي ما وبعدين تشربش ميه. شايف الصخر الابيض يعني بعد يعني 10 سنين و20 سنه بتلاقيه لونه اختلف وصار يجزز بس
المعين ابيض.
ابيض. عندنا شيوخ ونجاسة برضه نفس الشيء.
White Hills does not make only visible darkness and domination, past and present, but also the minor voices of people living in a state of exclusion. By knitting together the economic, familiar and political, I would like to propose that the film repositions and transforms our understandings of the quarries by re-encoding them as sites of cultural production through the process of filming. The discursive layers, the strata and sedimentations of local knowledge act as an archive of personal histories and experience, and of the myriad losses of land, economy, identity, history and community, as well as the changing landscape and conditions of the quarries. I've been cut short, so I'm sorry I had to slightly condense that. But many of the parts of the film, the segments that I've showed you in a way kind of illustrate much more this kind of relationship with the stone in Israel, but also the kind of what the film does is actually unravel a lot of the kind of very intimate relations, particularly of the men working in the quarries, and also kind of Ramsey's kind of life, the social kind of political landscape of Palestine today in relationship to neoliberalism. So through its 65 minutes, it kind of really kind of talks about these different stratifications within Palestine, and also kind of what's happening to kind of Palestine today, which is about the effects of the occupation, but also kind of internally the kind of details of the kind of politics of Palestine. So I'm going to leave it there, but thank you very much.